Welcome to the Sustainable Cleveland 2021 Virtual Summit. My name is Patty. I am Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Cleveland. I hope you got to enjoy the mayor's remarks since we had a couple glitches yesterday, but everything's going to be great today. We have some really amazing sessions lined up, and we're going to kick it off with one of the most exciting ones here happening currently in Cleveland. This is Vision Zero, keeping our people safe on our streets. A couple housekeeping tips. Look on the right side of your screen under chat. Next to the word chat is the word polls, and we will be doing a couple polls this morning. At any time, you are free to network with other attendees in the networking session on the left side of your screen. With that, I will turn it over to Callie Mersman.
Thank you so much, Patty, and good morning, everyone. We're thrilled to have you here to start the day with us. Like Patty said, there are a couple of polls in the poll menu, so if you have a chance to take those as we're talking, that will help us both understand who we're talking to and calibrate our remarks a little bit. My name is Callie Mersman. I'm the Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator in the Cleveland City Planning Commission, and I'm joined here by some wonderful colleagues: Ann Tilley with Cleveland City Council, Annie Pease with University Circle Incorporated, and Karis Zing from Midtown Cleveland. We're going to talk to you today about a variety of initiatives that we're working on across the city to make our roadways safer and to ensure that no one suffers life-altering injuries or death while they're trying to get to and from their daily lives and enjoy their time around the city. So I'm going to kick it off along with Anne going over a little bit of a high-level introduction to our Vision Zero initiative. This is something that we have been working on with many partners across the city and across the region for the last couple of years. The rubber is really hitting the road in 2021, and so we're excited to share progress with you as well as ways that you can be involved. After I go through a couple of slides, I'm going to hand it over to Annie and Karis, and they're going to drill down a little bit and talk about their great work in the neighborhoods in University Circle and Midtown to make roadways safer and more welcoming for people of all different abilities, travel modes, and ways of getting around. So again, we're really glad to have you here with us this morning, and without any further ado, I'm going to just go ahead and dive in. We will have time for discussion after this, so if you have questions that occur to you as we're talking, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll be moderating for us at the end. We hope to have a good 25 minutes to talk together, so please feel free to put those questions there. We'll also all share our contact information at the end of this. This is a lot of ongoing work, and so we look forward to partnering with you all moving forward as well. All right, so 1 per day. This is an important statistic for us because in looking at average crashes and rates across the last 5 years, we have discovered that 1 person per day within the city of Cleveland is either seriously injured or killed on our roads trying to get to and from work, home, school, wherever they are getting to. We also know that last year in 2020, 74 people died on City of Cleveland roads through traffic crashes. And so, as we all know, as people that travel and use our road network, these people are mothers, fathers, sisters, coworkers, friends. This is really a human issue that we're talking about, and it is very personal to many people that have been affected. So these are sort of the motivating numbers behind our work. I see some of the poll answers coming in terms of familiarity with the concept of Vision Zero. This is a relatively new thing that we're talking about here in Cleveland, but the idea of zero, the zero is no more traffic deaths or serious injuries on our roadways. And so that is the motivating direction. That's sort of the North Star of everything that we will be talking about today, is so that when we are back here, maybe next year, maybe a few years from now, those numbers on the previous slides are zero, and our roadways are much safer and more comfortable for people to navigate the street. Vision Zero as an initiative is international. It was started in Sweden in 1997 and sort of challenges the idea that deaths and injuries, that traffic crashes that lead to those things on our roadways are just sort of the price that we have to pay to get around. through approaching the system in a different way, thinking about road design, user behavior, enforcement, etc., we can allow people to get around without having any life-altering injuries or deaths. So what really this whole conversation is about is how we can build a better transportation system to ensure that people can get safely where they want to go. So the first step in that, of course, is to dive into the data a little bit. And so through our work with the Vision Zero initiative, we have some data insights that we can share here. We looked at crash reports over the last 5 years. So all of this information represents crashes that happened within the city of Cleveland from 2016 to 2020. And as I mentioned, we're really focused here on crashes that lead to serious injury or death. We know that crashes are going to happen. There are going to be fender benders or clipped mirrors, but that no one should suffer that serious injury or death trying to get around. And so, as you see here, there is a spectrum of crashes involving different modes: cars, pedestrians, motorcycles, bicyclists. But when we drill down on those that result in serious injury or death, we do see that there's this sort of vulnerable road user category, right? That's our jargony term for people who are walking, riding motorcycles, riding their bikes. When those types of road users are involved in crashes, it's more likely that it results in a serious injury or death. And so that is one focus area of Vision Zero. But I also really want to emphasize that over 2/3 of crashes that result in serious injury or death are just car crashes. So this isn't an initiative just about people on bikes. It's not about only people walking. This is for drivers too, even if you only ever drive. It's really about creating roads that work for everyone. The top bar here represents about 19,000 crashes over the last 5 years. And as we drill in, we're looking at the 1,400 or so, about 7.5% of all of those crashes that are FSI, which is letters FSI, fatal or serious injury crashes. You might see that in some of our materials or hear that as we're talking. So as we look into the fatal and serious injury data, there are a couple of key trends that are emerging. All of these statistics come out of OH1 crash reports. That's the paperwork that police fill out when you have a crash, you call them, they come out, or maybe you go to the police station to fill out a report. We know that that is sort of limiting, right? The information that we have is based on what the police officer fills out, what the people involved in the crash tell them. We know that some crashes don't even generate a crash report or aren't reported. So this is sort of a narrow vision, a narrow view of the data that we have available, but it does help us to understand some of the dynamics. So one key insight from our crash analysis so far is that speed matters. We see that the higher speed the crash is, the more likely it is to result in a serious injury or fatality. So one key strategy of Vision Zero initiatives is speed management, making sure that cars on the road and others are going slower so that if a crash does occur, it's less likely to be deadly or result in a serious injury. Another key insight that has come out of our crash analysis is that road design really matters. Across Cleveland, we have a broad street network, right? There are lots of different kinds of streets. Some are neighborhood residential streets, others are key commercial corridors, big arterials is the technical term. Across the entire city's network, only 14% of our streets are multi-lane arterial roadways, like is shown here. But we see that 71% of fatal and serious injury crashes are occurring on roads that look like this. And for the most part, they're roads that have the double yellow line in the center, maybe not quite as distinguished lane markings. Like sometimes there's a parking lane, sometimes there's 2 lanes, 1 lanes. I think we've all been on those roads across town. And so because of this data analysis, this is where one of our real focus areas is in terms of eliminating death and serious injury on the roadway. Another key insight coming out of the crash analysis is that impaired driving continues to be a challenge. We see that where drugs, alcohol, or marijuana are involved, fatal or serious injury outcomes are much, much more common, and alcohol is a contributing factor in 1/3 of the traffic fatalities in Cleveland. I think distracted driving is a much more difficult thing to quantify, But in general, things that are keeping drivers from focusing on the roadway are a big challenge for us and are a big contributor to serious injury and fatality. The final trend I want to share with you this morning to shape our discussion is that this is a racial equity issue, as we have seen in the distribution of serious injury and fatal crashes across the city. Even when the data is normalized or controlled for the miles of roadway in any given geography and the number of people and jobs happening in different parts of the city, we see that serious injury and fatal crashes are much more prevalent in the east side of the city. So take a look at the dark teal areas, and that really shows you where there's like a disproportionate disparity of fatal and serious injury crashes. And so equity is a theme that is filtering through the strategies that we are developing and is something that we're keeping in the forefront of our mind in terms of the impact and the trauma of serious injury and crashes on Clevelanders. So, given that we know these things, what are we doing about it? That's one of the things we're here to talk to you about today. The Vision Zero initiative, like I said earlier, really adopts a safe systems approach. The things that we know through the safe systems approach is that we as human beings are fragile. If we get hit at high speeds, we're likely to be injured. And we also sometimes make mistakes, like sometimes even I, as the pedestrian coordinator, forget to look at the crosswalk before I'm turning left, right? The transportation system should be designed in a way that can accommodate some of those mistakes that we as humans make and not result in serious injuries or fatalities. What that means is outlining very specific strategies to achieve safe vehicles, safe road users, safe speeds on our streets, safe road design, and ensuring that we have really good post-crash care so that when a crash does happen, people are able to recover and are not seriously injured or dying as a result of that. What this looks like is basically there's a good metaphor of overlapping layers of Swiss cheese. So if any one of these categories of strategies fails in a given situation, if there's a hole in that slice of cheese, there's another slice on top of it that maybe covers up that hole. So if there is a vehicle failure or a road user makes a mistake, there's something in the road design, or it's at slow speed, or there's a technology piece in the vehicle that can help prevent that crash from being deadly. All of this framing and the data trends that we see are being pulled together currently into an action plan for Cleveland to achieve Vision Zero. So we're about halfway through this process at this point. There is an open public survey and some informational outreach meetings that I'm going to talk to you about in the next slides. But the idea is that this action plan will take all of the data insights that we have. It will be a data-driven strategy with key actions, responsible parties, and timelines to achieve a safe transportation system in Cleveland. So we're almost all the way through our community meetings at this point. There is one coming up on Saturday at Garden View Hill Park. This is on St. Clair Avenue, right around MLK Drive. These are drop-in, open-air, open house sessions where I'll be there on Saturday. You can come up, talk about some, any questions you have about Vision Zero, as well as your experiences on the roadway and where you feel safe, where you don't feel safe, and ideas you have to improve street safety. We're also likely adding one in Collinwood, so stay tuned for that coming up soon. We also have several other opportunities to get involved in the action planning process, as well as a lot of additional crash data and potential solutions available on our website. So when I turn it over to Annie and Karis, they're going to get a little bit more specific about programmatic interventions. We can also talk about things that we have been doing to address some of these crash trends so far in the Vision Zero initiative. But I wanted to give you this high-level overview today to sort of show where we're going in terms of the planning process and what Vision Zero is looking like in Cleveland. On our website, we currently have a public survey open that has a lot of opportunity to get input. You can sign up for a mailing list to get updates and be informed about additional information, future engagement opportunities. There's also a close call form. So I mentioned before that we know that the crash data that comes out of police reports is not holistic. It doesn't give us a 100% complete picture. So we also have a form where maybe a crash didn't occur. Maybe it was a close call, you almost had a crash. Maybe there's a location where you repeatedly see unsafe behaviors or feel unsafe. You can fill out that form and that helps give us a broader picture of what's going on. And we also have active social media accounts, which Anne does a wonderful job of keeping updated, that you can follow for future activities, information, and to stay engaged. So with all of that, we can get into much more detail in the discussion, but I'm going to turn it over to Annie at UCI to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing to achieve safer transportation in their service area.
Great. Thanks so much, Callie. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can you all see that okay? I'm looking for nods. So, okay, thank you.
It looks great.
Great. Callie, thank you so much. Great for the great introduction. My name is Annie Pease. I'm the Director of Transportation at University Circle Incorporated. I'm also a proud member of both the Data and Evaluation Subcommittee of Cleveland's Vision Zero initiative, as well as the Design and Engineering Subcommittee. For those not familiar with University Circle Incorporated, I'll give some context very quickly. We are a community-based nonprofit on Cleveland's east side. We're 4 miles east of downtown Cleveland. Our geography is the area surrounding university hospitals, Case Western, Cleveland Clinic, the VA, and Cleveland's arts and cultural institutions. We're about 1.5 square miles. We have 50,000 jobs in University Circle, which is about half the size of downtown, and a growing residential population. We have just over 10,000 residents in University Circle as well. So as it relates to road safety, the functions of UCI include transportation planning, community education, public safety, and advocacy for the neighborhood. In addition to putting on neighborhood events and providing services for the neighborhood, the University Circle Police Department is also part of University Circle Incorporated. And so that's where the public safety side comes in. As a nonprofit in this space, we are a partner to both public agencies and the community. So as a nonprofit, we have this kind of unique role where we're not always in the position to implement the things that we want to see, but we can advocate. And again, our core functions include transportation planning, community education, public safety, and advocacy. So we became very interested in pedestrian safety and road safety specifically when UCI became aware of a string of crashes involving pedestrians crossing the streets in marked crosswalks around University Circle. So this was just a 4-month period, and our staff learned that all of these circles that you see on the map were locations where there was a pedestrian struck by a car, again, while crossing the street in a marked crosswalk. 2 of these pedestrians, unfortunately, did not survive those crashes. But we, given the importance of being able, having a walkable neighborhood, a safe neighborhood, where people don't need to have a car to get from A to B, but can safely get where they need to go on foot. This was really alarming to us. And it led us to want to better understand whether this 4-month period was really unusual and there was something specific going on, or if this was a broader trend and we were just more aware of it now. So it led us down a data dive on crashes in University Circle. What you're looking at this map, this is a 5-year crash map of the district. The black dotted lines is the neighborhood boundary. And then the colorful dots you see on the map are crashes. The map on the left shows all crashes in University Circle, and the map on the right shows crashes just involving bicyclists or pedestrians. When we look at these maps, what we're looking for are trends where there are clusters of dots together, and then also the severity of crashes. So on this map, the small blue dots represent like just a crash where there's some property damage, but no one was injured. And that scales up to the large red dots are fatal crashes. So seeing concentrations of the yellow, orange, and red dots, those are the more serious crashes. And given what we've learned through our Vision Zero work is that some of those smaller blue dots are not something that in the urban context we can prevent when people are getting around in cars. But we understand now that those red dots, the fatal crashes and the serious injury crashes, are preventable through this Vision Zero lens. What we also looked at with the difference between these maps, that map on the left, all crashes, there were 25% of those crashes resulted in someone being injured, an individual being injured. However, the map on the right, when we just look at crashes involving cyclists or pedestrians, 90% of those crashes resulted in someone being injured or killed. And that was also very alarming to us and really spoke to the vulnerability that people walking are experiencing on our streets. We also saw that on average, in a year, this is again a 5-year crash history, in a year there were 20 people struck by cars in University Circle, which was an alarming statistic to us as well. So we took action and created a local pedestrian safety initiative called Vision Zero, called Project Yield, which we launched at the beginning of 2020. And what we were really focused on is raising awareness among the community of the importance of road safety to the goals that we as a neighborhood value and share. We really focused on that awareness, advocacy for safer streets interventions, and then really staying centered on the data and what the data is telling us about where problem areas are. So a number of our awareness interventions, we did kiosk inserts, we pointed out high pedestrian intersections. When we advocated for a change in signage or some positive improvement for pedestrian safety, we made little signs to let people know what was happening and why, and we asked people for feedback. We did community advisory speed signage on the previous maps in those areas where we've had a higher number of crashes. We put out signs to remind people of the speed limits and that the speed limit should be the max speed that anyone's traveling. We also did a bumper sticker campaign. From a planning perspective, in partnership with the University Circle Police Department, we started a new practice, which has been helpful to our staff internally, when we learn of a crash involving a pedestrian or a cyclist, a team of our staff goes out and does an assessment of the site and identifies whether there are near-term things that we could advocate for or change ourselves to improve the safety at those locations. And then we also document all of those interventions so that we are better informed for our longer term planning on where we have issues around pedestrian safety. We've also, in conjunction with Cleveland's Vision Zero initiative, are collecting close call reports. And this is a platform that was created as part of Vision Zero and that we've really put the word out. To Callie's point earlier, we know that when a crash happens, number one, it's too late, someone has already been injured. And that the crash reports are fairly limited in terms of what's going on, and often if the pedestrian is injured and goes to the hospital, it might not get the whole story about what happened documented in those reports. So close call reporting is really an important factor to be more proactive in road safety interventions, and then also get a more balanced view as to what happens during some of these incidences. So we have a link on our website that collects information in the same portal that we share with the University Circle Police Department, as well as the subcommittees of Cleveland's Vision Zero initiative. We've also hosted quarterly pedestrian safety community meetings on Zoom this year. Hopefully we'll be in person in the future, but we've shared this data with members of the University Circle community and anyone interested, and gotten more specifics from people, especially residents, about safety concerns on streets near them and just generally in University Circle. So what I'm going to focus on for my last couple slides is a specific intervention that we've made in the Uptown neighborhood. So Uptown is the district around the Euclid Avenue towards the Cleveland Institute of Art. What we learned is that there are a couple of crosswalks there that we have both crash history there with some crashes involving pedestrians, but we also hear a lot from people in this area that crossing, this is Euclid that we're seeing on this image here, crossing Euclid or crossing Mayfield feels scary and it's intimidating, and people don't feel there's a perception of a lack of safety there. So this is one spot we've really focused on, Euclid Avenue and East 117th Street. The building you see in the background there is a dorm for the Cleveland Institute of Art. The Cleveland Hearing and Speech Center is the building on the left of this image. And we set out a camera to observe pedestrian and vehicular behavior at this location to see what's going on. And hopefully you can see this video rolling. But there's a pedestrian on the left side of the screen there waiting to cross. And there's a white car approaching the crosswalk. In this instance, this driver gets out to make a delivery of some sort, but the pedestrian steps out and has to jog to avoid being hit by that car traveling in the middle lane. And no one had specifically told us that this was the problem going on there, but it resonated really clearly with this feedback we were hearing that it just feels scary and people don't really, they feel intimidated to cross the street there. So I'll show this video again. And I'll try to advance the slide here. Here we go. So what's happening here in that instance is that when you have a mid-block crosswalk like that, and there's a car on the curb lane, which in this image is the red car, when that car stops, and maybe they're stopping or they're parked there, or maybe they're pulling up to the crosswalk to yield to a pedestrian crossing the street, that car obstructs the view of a person who steps into the crosswalk there from a car traveling next to it, in this case, the blue car. It also obstructs that pedestrian's view of an oncoming car in the travel lane. So this is a particularly dangerous series of events because this blue car in the image on the left doesn't know to slow down. They don't see the person there and the person can't see them. So both are surprised, and this can lead to a higher speed collision with a pedestrian because that blue car might not slow down. So a common intervention when this problem exists is to add an advanced yield marking in front of this crosswalk to encourage the car in the curb lane to stop further away from the crosswalk, increasing the car next to its visibility of anyone crossing the street, and also allows the pedestrian to see that car coming. This is not a common treatment that we see many places around the city of Cleveland. And we took the feedback that we heard, the crash data, and we talked to the city of Cleveland about the issue we were having. And what we were able to install was these advanced yield markings. So at 2 locations in Uptown, we have the advanced yield markings on the street with a sign accompanying those pavement markings to notify drivers that that's where they should yield as they're approaching the crosswalk. And what we are looking for here is, one, we want people to feel safer. We want the number of crashes involving pedestrians in this part of University Circle to go down. We want people to slow down and know that even if those markings aren't there, that if there's a crosswalk mid-block, they should be looking for pedestrians. But this is an additional cue to people to observe road safety here and look for people walking around. We have measured yield rates, and this is the last slide I have to leave you with. Before we did the advanced yield markings and signs, our staff went out and measured the percentage of vehicles yielding to pedestrians before we had the advanced stop marking. And at Euclid and 117th, which is what we saw in that video, that number was 5% of vehicles were yielding to pedestrians before. The other location is Mayfield Road at Uptown Alley, near the Museum of Contemporary Art, and that was 44%. we're yielding. All things equal, the only thing we changed was adding the advanced stop bars and adding that sign with the arrow pointing down. After we installed that treatment at Euclid and 117th, same observation windows, 39% of vehicles yielded to pedestrians after those signs and markings were installed. And at Mayfield and Uptown Alley, that number jumped up to 63%. So we know that we still have a long way to go. We'd love to see, especially Euclid and 117th, that number to be even higher. But we are continuing to work on understanding areas that are of highest concern, continuing to work with the city through the Vision Zero initiative and otherwise, and to make positive changes and make the university safer for everyone traveling there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Annie. Next we have Karis Zing from Midtown Cleveland. She's going to talk to us about the People Streets Initiative. Hopefully. You're still showing as muted, Karis. All right, we're going to do a little bit of creative technology circumvention here. Karis is going to call me and I'm going to put her on speakerphone. And she'll talk to us from this way. Anne and Annie, if you can let me know if you can hear Karis well.
I'm so sorry about this. I tried to restart my computer and it still didn't work. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear Karis just fine.
Yes, perfect.
Yes. Okay. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. It is great to be here with all of you. I'm just going to put my screen in full screen, if that will work. I think maybe I shouldn't have done that. My computer is not ready for this today, I guess. Well, let me just start talking. Oh, there we go. I am really excited to be here on behalf of the People Streets. When Callie and Annie asked us to chat, I think it was, really clear that there were a lot of thoughts that were and that were kind of aligning with the goal of the People Streets and with Vision Zero. And so, just wanted to start with telling you all how we came together. So this is a group of grassroots folks that really formed actually in the spring of 2020 in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, where there was really this groundswell of movements. And I think a lot of people came together thinking about our streets and this divide that I think our streets have historically had on our communities, particularly in Black and Brown communities. And so a number of folks kind of coming together thinking about how our streets can actually protect or protect people instead of cause harm and divide neighborhoods. And so this really came out of downtown Cleveland residents, and eventually there was this working group with representation from a lot of different stakeholders that kind of came together for this group. And so really it started as a theory of an idea. How can we just make our streets safer? We settled along Payne Avenue because it connects from downtown through Asiatown to Huff and through a lot of communities. And we did things like this walking audit. So we just walked Payne Avenue and we did like a little walking cleanup, like how to identify problem areas on the street. And so this was an example of a walk audit that Callie had brought for us, where we could just mark places where crossings felt unsafe, problem areas in the crosswalks, and things like that. So this was really kind of the conception of this group. And so we also highlighted with Payne Avenue, one of the reasons the group kind of focused on this area, I think, kind of connects to the history of our streets as well. So we know that in Asiatown, we have this disconnected community because of the highway, and this is the bridge over the highway that I think really kind of connects Campus District and Asiatown, but feels really unsafe. It still is the equivalent of 60 feet across, the same as the rest of Payne Avenue, and kind of is this bridge that folks tend to just speed down. And I think that's representative of a lot of other examples along Payne Avenue as well. We noted that Payne Avenue is, again, the equivalent of 6 lanes across is actually 60 feet. It was built for about 25,000 cars per day, and at the last traffic count, it actually received about 6,000 cars per day, and it was before the Dave's Market closed 3 years ago, and so now we know that the traffic is actually a lot less. And so this is really a street that is the core of a neighborhood. Again, it connects several neighborhoods, but it is also the core of Asia Town, and we see a lot of people, a lot of seniors going to get their groceries, pushing their carts down the street, families pushing strollers, oftentimes kind of racing across the street because there is so little traffic and the street is so wide. Cars really do speed pretty quickly down the street. We also notice there are a number of spaces where the markings are kind of unclear, the parking lanes are not marked off, and some intersections, such as this one, the crosswalk and the driveway actually intersect in a way. They're right next to each other, and so there's not a clear differentiation between the walking and driving area. Payne Avenue is also home to Campus International, so an elementary school that sees thousands of kids a day, and right across the street is Norma Hare Women's Center, which is one of the largest women's shelters in the state of Ohio. And so, as Callie mentioned in the Vision Zero presentation, a lot of these sectors really stood out as really this equity issue. We have heard a lot about thinking about Payne Avenue and reorienting it from cars to people who are biking or cycling and people who are walking, but really I think as more of a sustainability issue. And while I think that's true, one of the core issues here in Payne Avenue is there are already a lot of people who rely on Payne Avenue for walking, for biking, and for public transportation, and that's their primary mode of getting around. So this group got together and was thinking about Payne Avenue. So we saw kind of how it looks today and thinking about a lot of ideas. And really, for several months, this working group was thinking through the potential. So what can we do? What if Payne Avenue looked something like this? What if it had more spaces that were dedicated to pedestrians and cyclists? What if it had seating, especially because there is no street furniture? There are so many people who are experiencing homelessness, or people who are just riding transit, or just people who are walking down Payne Avenue who would love a place to sit. And so what if it was a little softer, had softened up the edges, had a little bit more color, and was a little bit more vibrant? What if it reflected some of the culture of the neighborhoods that it's in, and could really demonstrate a connector across these communities? So we spent a lot of time thinking through a lot of ideas, ranging from examples like this that are kind of more tactical, temporary pop-up examples, all the way through to overhead lighting examples and lanterns and some really big ideas about Payne Avenue. And in this past year, this group really thought, what can we do right now? And so People's Streets came together to really, or started to really solidify around this idea of painting crosswalks and curb extensions. So just smaller ideas that could really demonstrate safer places for pedestrians, for cyclists, and to temporarily restripe a portion of the street to allow for bike lanes. And so this is kind of in the context of one of the other reasons we chose Payne Avenue is that it is potentially on the docket for restriping and resurfacing in the coming years. And again, because the traffic count is really this mismatch to the design of the street, we wanted to be able to promote and advocate for ideas that could be integrated into the permanent resurfacing of the street. And so we thought, well, as a temporary example, let's demonstrate this, use it as a community engagement tool, and be able to track how people respond so that we can continue to advocate through the city as, to get maybe a different type of crosswalk when they resurface it, to be a more permanent design that can really stand out and differentiate, again, the space for pedestrians and cyclists versus the space for drivers. And so through an amazing volunteer, created these designs to restripe a couple of the intersections along Payne Avenue, and this is just one of them with this design. And in a few intersections, we've actually also included some examples of painting some curb extensions to kind of provide that example of narrowing the street. So again, a lot across Payne Avenue, it has a driving lane, 2 driving lanes going in each direction, and a parking lane. And so the idea is that the curb extension would give more space for pedestrians to cross the street. And in some locations, we actually have observed the need for a new crosswalk. And so we've provided an example of what that could look like. And these designs are really based on existing patterns in the street, based on some of our street signage in Asiatown. And we've also kind of floated in the future when these could be permanent. What if it could kind of reflect the neighborhood that's in? So moving from along Payne Avenue, when it's in Asiatown, maybe it looks like this. When it's in Campus District, maybe it reflects more of the Campus District and CSU identity. And so this is our timeline. We really started talking in the summer of 2020. We have a learning lab demonstration that is tentatively scheduled based on the weather next Friday from 1 to 5. So we'd love to invite you all at 32nd and Payne Avenue. More details will be forthcoming. And the goal is that we would test one crosswalk this fall and paint the rest of the crosswalks temporarily in the spring of 2020, planning for the street resurfacing to be in the coming years. And so we know this is one of the first times that this has happened in the city of Cleveland. And so we've heard a lot, how can you do it? And I just wanted to emphasize that really this is the coalition of many partners. And so really humbled and honored to get to work with so many people, including Callie, the City of Cleveland, and the Department of City Planning, Nicole Calhoun, and a lot of other folks from all these different organizations who really have come together and and worked over the past year to kind of think through some of this processes to make sure it aligns with some of the existing standards that and working closely with traffic and engineering and other departments in the city. We also are grateful to be able to be using the Street Supplies program through NOACA, which gave recommendations for different materials and also allows us to test different materials for this kind of temporary pop-up. And also really grateful to a grant from Spin Street, who is really helping to make this happen as well. And with that, I just wanted to end. Thank you.
Thanks, Karis. I'm going to maybe keep you on the line so you can address any questions that might come, if that's okay. Hopefully we don't get any really bad feedback in terms of the sound. Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
go ahead,
Go
Callie.
for it, Anne.
Thanks, Callie. Just want to say thank you to Annie and Karis, who have been doing just some excellent work, and we're so proud to have them as members on our Vision Zero task force. So I guess this is now an appropriate time, I answer some questions. I'm seeing in our chat a question from Derek about, what does the data say about, yield rates between physical infrastructure, such as like a bollard or a bump out versus paint. And I don't know, Annie, do we know that?
Yeah, it has been an interesting thing specifically to use yield rates, as that was our before and after metric with that intervention. And there are a lot of things from an engineering perspective that you can do to increase the safety of mid-block pedestrian crossings, which is really what those two things had in common. They had push buttons, rectangular, rapid flashing beacons. They were ladder style, wide crosswalks. they both had center-mounted yield to pedestrian signs already. That was the existing infrastructure. Both are on 25-mile-per-hour streets, and both are in business districts. So you have commercial stores fronting the sidewalk next to the travel lanes. So on its face, like the infrastructure there was good to encourage yielding, and it looks like a walkable area, but it doesn't match how people are using the streets there. So from an engineering perspective, there's kind of a hierarchy of next level interventions that you can make. And in addition to what was currently out there, adding these advanced yield markings with the signage to tell drivers that they should yield in advance of the crosswalk was the next incremental step in having stronger pedestrian controls at those locations. So there are stronger pedestrian interventions, but in our conversations with the city, the incremental approach with regular monitoring was the preferred treatment there.
Great, thanks, Annie. And looking at Karis's presentation of some of the treatments they're going to be making over on Payne, perhaps something that's we want to keep an eye on those bump outs over there. Kind of monitor it on all fronts. So that data collection will be important. The other question I'm seeing in our chat, hold on, let me find it, from Yvette, talking about, walking downtown and, even when there are those rectangular rapid flashing beacons, people don't always stop, and it can be a little intimidating to try and cross the street, not knowing whether someone's going to yield to you, even though they're supposed to. So I'll kind of pose this question to anyone, what can be done about that? I think at Vision Zero, we talk a lot about, the role of enforcement versus the role of design versus the role of education. So what can we do there?
I can start, Anne. I think this gets back to the Swiss cheese metaphor, right? Like it is multiple strategies all at once that overlap. Educating people, drivers, about yielding when they're turning to pedestrians that have the right of way in the crosswalk is of course important. There are signs that can be posted at high traffic intersections that say like yield to pedestrians on the green light. That's another one of those cues to drivers. There are some design solutions that we do have at some intersections in downtown, including leading pedestrian intervals. So like Yvette mentioned, when often sort of the standard signal phasing is when the traffic going straight and turning, of course, gets a green light, the walk signs parallel also turn on. So if you're turning left or right, you're turning at the same time the pedestrian in the crosswalk has that walk sign. Leading pedestrian intervals have the walk signs come on a couple of seconds before the cars get that green light, so pedestrians can get a head start and be more visible to drivers who are turning. I know that we have LPIs active along Lakeside at East 6th and Ontario, and I'm almost sure there are a couple of others that aren't at the top of my head right now, but that is the type of thing that we can look at adding. There are also things like protected left turn phases. So when there's a left turn slot and a green arrow, that separates heavy turning volumes from the pedestrian crossing. So those are just some ideas of overlapping interventions. I would love to hear Annie and Karis's ideas as well.
Yeah, I would add often the leap that people make on that issue around like driver culture, and I hear that a lot in Northeast Ohio. We just drive, like people don't drive expecting to see pedestrians. They don't yield here like they do in other cities. We don't have that culture. And I think that culture, like there are so many, as we all know in the space of sustainability, there are so many layers to what creates that culture that we really have to, and I think Vision Zero is the incredible opportunity to do this, like really fundamentally change the way that we're thinking about our streets. And the People's Streets movement is such a good, like very specific example of Payne Avenue and A Street in Cleveland and neighbors coming together to talk about that. But when we've treated our streets like funnels to move cars as quickly as possible from A to B for such a long time, making changes like this and then shifting expectations is really hard. And we know that for that bigger cultural change to happen, there have to be inputs at different levels. So I think raising this topic in the sustainability spaces, raising it in the safety spaces, raising it in the economic development spaces, raising it in the equity spaces, like all of these pieces are impacted by that type of driving culture that we have. And people complain about it all the time. It's like talking about the weather. People talk about these things. But we really have to elevate this to the level where Callie stats at the beginning, 1 person a day being seriously injured or killed on people's streets, 74 people dying on our streets last year. When we think about the things that are really posing a threat to any individual's safety in Cleveland, where are we on this? You know, like this really needs to hit those conversations at the level that it deserves. Another just quick thought on a lot of that yielding to that specific question on like, I press the button, the lights are flashing and no one stops for me. There is a challenge. Lots of people will jump to enforcement as like, well, if the police were enforcing the crosswalk laws, then that wouldn't happen. Drivers would know. But legally in Cleveland, a driver doesn't have to yield to a pedestrian until the pedestrian steps into the street on the same side of the street that the driver is traveling. So police officers really can't pull someone over if there's a pedestrian standing on the ramp on the side of the street intending to cross. That is a law set at the state level. So that's a policy issue separate from just a culture in Northeast Ohio driving issue. The two can go together and you can see the overlap there, but specifically on asking police to intervene in that way, it's complicated.
If I could just jump in to pull on one of those threads, I think everything Annie said is spot on, but as Karis talked about, and as we saw in the data, you know, equity is a really important value that has to permeate all of this work. And as we're having conversations about the role of police, the role of enforcement, unintended consequences of different strategies for enforcement, and the need for things like cars yielding for pedestrians or obeying the speed limit, that, you know, knowing that someone is watching to see if you're compliant is is a helpful thing in making sure that people are compliant. Automated enforcement, things like red light cameras, yielding cameras, speed cameras have been used very effectively to achieve both more equitable enforcement as well as compliance on the roads in some other cities. In Cleveland, some of you may recall that we passed a charter amendment in 2014 outlawing any sort of camera enforcement in the city. But I think as Annie was talking about changing culture, and as we are learning more and growing more in our collective understanding of the problems on the road, our desire around what enforcement can achieve and how it impacts populations, rethinking what tools are available to us in that regard will also be an important conversation moving forward from this.
Yeah, thanks, Callie. I think that's a super important point that you bring up. We can't just jump to the conclusion that we need to use one or the other and really kind of look at this holistically. So looking at our time, you know, I want to be respectful, but you know, we have two, I think, really good questions that we need to talk about. So the next one I'll look at is Angelo posed about using the city's new, you know, the ordinance has been around for a little bit, but the decorative street painting ordinance. And so Karis, could you quickly walk us through what did that look like? What was it look, you know, how to go through that process? And I'll quickly add, you know, Slavic Village Development Corporation also went through this process. So Joe at Slavic Village, if you also want to connect to him. But Karis, go ahead, walk us through that process pretty quickly.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Callie. And Callie, please chime in too, because I know that you were so instrumental in helping us navigate through using that ordinance or that permit. So we use the ordinance for street painting as a guide, which has very specific requirements for colors, so that the colors have to be kind of neutral. So you know, it's kind of earth tone colors, I think is what it said. And so we really use that to shape the design But actually going through the process, and I will say we're kind of in the midst of this at the moment and still moving through it. But I don't know if I would call it, I think it was clear. I don't know if straightforward is the word I would use, but it is requiring a lot of navigation through the city, kind of working along the way. We've been, again, in communication with the mayor's office and with traffic and engineering for several months. So long before they're seeing this permit cross their desk. So it shouldn't be a surprise. And I think I think the partnership with city planning is just so essential in that. Did you want to add anything, Callie?
No, not at this point, but I'm happy to talk to anyone who may be interested in doing something like this and figuring out how to work within the bounds of our current decorative street painting program to figure out what can be done. Because I think there is a lot of room to be creative and to change the street environment within what we currently have. And it's wonderful to have partners that are willing to go on this journey with us.
Yeah, thanks, Callie and Karis.
If I can add one more thing too, just thinking about the last question, a combination of this question and the last question. So I think, yeah, as Callie said, we have a lot of room to be creative within this ordinance. And honestly, I think for some of our concerns, in some places, there's not even a crosswalk where there should be. So it's a crossing, but it's not marked. And so honestly, at some points in the process, I was like, just getting a marked crosswalk would be amazing. Or even just like the tiger striping across. So it's, you know, not just the two lines, but it's more defined as a crosswalk. And so I think that's one thing where to some extent, we just wanted anything. And how amazing to make sure that it can be more creative and reflect more an artistic and beautiful, really, crosswalk. But I think the other thing is that kind of back to the last question of the, you know, I think even a marked crosswalk, if you have a marked crosswalk across a 60-foot road that, you know, so few cars are driving on, of course, drivers are still going to, I would still speed down that road. And so I think, again, kind of talking about the layering of intervention, the design of the roads really have to change drastically. And one of the things about Payne Avenue is we actually have the sidewalks are not really that wide. And so one of the issues we ran against, we kind of are working on this tree planting plan, and the sidewalks are actually not wide enough to withstand planting trees. And so I think part of it all is integrated, right? It's like, well, if we could take one lane or two lanes back from Payne Avenue and kind of bring that back into the sidewalk and have more space for trees, more space for pedestrians, I think it really is all integrated into the design. And that's possible, but it's not easy work. And I think that takes a lot and will take a long time to kind of push to change our design from, as Annie said, just so auto-oriented to shifting back to the spaces where our communities deserve space.
Yeah. Thanks, Karis. I think that speaks a little bit to the question Derek posed in the chat box about, you know, what can we take away lanes from underutilized roads? So definitely an ongoing conversation. I see we're at 10:30, but I just want to have one last pitch. You know, we talked about what's currently going on. You know, we're in the middle of an action planning process, kind of creating our own roadmap of how we create roads safer. So I want to pose the one last question to Callie of, you know, we create an action plan, we hear from residents, we put it all together. What comes next?
All right, so this action plan will have a table of strategies that has timelines and responsible parties. We've mentioned that we have a task force with stakeholders from all different sectors, governmental, nonprofit, the healthcare industry in Cleveland is represented there. We also have 5 subcommittees that are actively meeting. And so this is a planning process to continue to fuel and guide that work in a synchronized and synthesized way. Those stakeholders and those groups will continue to work to make the changes that we've talked about today and want to see in the roads. So sign up for the mailing list, email us to find out more. Sorry we went over, Patty, but it's yours now.
Oh, that was totally fine. I could listen to you ladies for the rest of the day. Didn't I tell you, everyone, this was going to be a great session? And it was. Please feel free to reach out to our presenters. The pinned message in the chat, you can tap their names and you can send direct messages. Our next sessions start in 12 minutes-ish. Another great lineup. Stay tuned. In the meantime, you can click the networking button and meet other people here in the summit. Check out the schedule, see what other sessions we have going on today. And again, thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to our amazing presenters for this wonderful breakout session on Vision Zero. Enjoy the rest of your day.